Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 346, recorded Monday, April 21st, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, and it's available on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. There's even a video version available on YouTube. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is my friend Jonny, but you may know him better as the happy, high-flying Pixelrips. Hello, sir.
Hello, I have been happy this week. We've been talking about all the fun stuff that's been filling up our weekends in the render distance. That's the extended version of the podcast that our patrons get to listen to if you support the show over at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Joel's been celebrating an early birthday and watching some K-drama. I have been thinking I should get on my bike a little bit more, and we've been chatting about that. So if, once again, you're interested in that, head over to patreon.com/thespawnchunks. You can also listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every week. We also have monthly hangouts and quarterly hangouts. So the first is you letting us know what you've been up to in Minecraft that month, kind of similar to what we do in the quick login every week on the show. And then the quarterly hangouts are the behind the scenes facts and figures of the podcast. We got one of those coming up sometime later, I think maybe in early May. So stick around for that and you'll hear all of the performance metrics across all of the different podcasting platforms that we publish on, including the YouTube stats, and the behind the scenes look at that is always kind of fun for people who are into that. Once again, that's patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
So, as per usual with the development cycle at Mojang, there's a lot going on. What have you had going on in Minecraft this week?
This week I did get a chance to check out the Snapshot. More on that when we cover the news. In the meantime, another Snapshot has taken my attention, and it is still the Craft Mine update, the April Fool's update that they made this year. And it's a different beast. It's a very different way of playing the game. The roguelike enforcement of, hopping into a world and only kind of blitzing through it to get certain resources and then returning to a hub is a really interesting one. I've made a bunch of skill tree progress now, thanks to a few discoveries, a couple of which were hinted at by my audience in the comments of the first episode, and a couple of which I discovered by myself. First of all, lapis lazuli blocks are worth a bunch, and if you can get hold of a decent amount of it through just mining a few blocks, then you can leave with a bunch of blocks that convert directly into XP when you go back to the hub world. You don't keep any of the resources that you bring with you, but you do end up with a ton of XP being rewarded depending on how rare or how valuable the stuff you brought back is. And so if you convert it into blocks, some of the rare material is worth way more than if it's just individual ingots or the raw elements of it. I discovered that cut copper is worth the same as copper blocks, but of course, if you convert it from a copper block into 4 cut copper using the stone cutter, that means you have to mine less for way more reward. So that became my strategy later on. There's also extra XP that you can unlock from the skill tree that you get after completing each level. And so that can add sort of a multiplier. There are even elements you can add into the levels that give you a multiplier. Like there was one I used which basically turned every block into having the physics of ice, so you were sliding around a little bit as you were moving. So I had a bit of fun with that. Ended up getting probably like 200 levels worth of XP, and the rewards I'm unlocking are worth, 20 levels, 25 levels a pop, but I'm unlocking stuff that lets me start with equipment in a similar way to how roguelike games will give you permanent upgrades to your character that next time you go in, you deal more damage or you have a better setup for something. So I now have a setup where I can start with a pickaxe, a netherite axe, a netherite sword, like a lot more geared up. And I think armor is probably the next thing I'm going to work on. In the meantime, though, I got ambushed by something I wasn't expecting and hadn't heard about, which was that occasionally the Minecrafter, the central kind of hub that you return to and put elements into to generate a new world, that will occasionally throw you a mandatory level that you have to do that you can't change any of the elements of. I don't know if it's going to be the same for everybody, but mine was a cave environment with no trees. I think it was a desert biome or something like that. So I couldn't craft anything once I got in there, and I had to survive like a wave of, like a pillager raid style, like waves of skeletons spawning in. And at that point, I hadn't unlocked any of the starter equipment, so I was basically left running around trying to bait the skeletons into shooting something that would then attack them in retaliation. Safe to say it didn't work out super well for me, but all of that has gone into a video now and it's up on YouTube, so if you want to continue to follow my exploits in Craft Mine, it's a heck of a game. It's very, very silly.
It's really cool that they can take the existing game of Minecraft and turn it into something so gripping, I guess, as far as a gameplay loop goes. Take existing game mechanics from other genres and kind of apply it to Minecraft without like too much change. Like, it doesn't feel like a lot of those mod packs that you see that look like they really changed Minecraft, where it almost feels like a different game. This just, like, all the screenshots just look like vanilla Minecraft, like it just, outside of a couple of icons and a few things that you're like, okay, I don't normally see that block in that context in vanilla Minecraft, but everything else is vanilla. It's just that one thing looks different than another. But it's really cool to know that you're getting so much out of it, and enough to like produce a full video. And it's not just like a snapshot where you dabble in it for like an afternoon and you're like, that was cool, but like I'm not coming back to it. You seem to be very much coming back to it.
Yeah, in the same way that I was with One Block at a Time, where it feels like they've created a new game using Minecraft as the game engine, effectively. And so a lot of the rules are the same. You're still mining stuff with the same tools and equipment and everything. Like, a lot of the items and whatnot are the same, but everything having an inherent value to it that translates directly into XP levels is really interesting. And like I said before, it's a really interesting look at some of the stuff we talked about on the show previously about what would happen if they overhauled the XP system to be more about leveling up a character and less about improving your tools and enchanting things. So that's been really fun. It's been very, very silly. The flip side to this has been spending time on Misadventures, which is adding the RPG genre into Minecraft, but on a much more low-key and player-led way. So we're still manipulating the world to our own ends a little bit. We're still kind of like working in these long-term plans of creating this RPG shared environment. So my Sky Pirate Roost that I worked on last week, the interior for that is still going pretty well. I'm still working on it, so I don't have a ton of screenshots of that. What I have been doing is, in the meantime, trying to obtain every custom mount the server has discovered so far. The admins have hidden these in various different quest lines and dungeons and things like that. So the first dungeon that you attempt, the sewers under the central town of Maryport, has a merchant in there who's just a rat, and you can interact with some of the other rats just by like giving them food and things, and it gives you a little bit of experience. But there's one rat that is named, and if you talk to it, it tells you can buy a rat mount. You just right click on it like you would a villager and they'll trade you a rat mount. The only problem is that you have to earn reputation with the sewer rats in order to be able to buy the mount. But then if you feed them enough food, you end up with a rideable rat that you can use like a horse and traverse the overworld with it. There are a bunch of other ones like this, and there's a sheep that you can get from the shepherd who sort of works out in the ranch, and you just offer them help shearing some sheep, and you get hold of a sheep mount that way. Fwip built a stables very early for people to be able to park their mounts in when they visit Maryport, and there's a vendor there who will sell you a horse as well, as long as your reputation with the town is in good standing. The two that are the most difficult to acquire are the goat mount, which requires you to do a quest for the goat herd who sort of lives out in the mountains, and you just have to breed a bunch of goats. But every time you breed 5 goats, he gives you a reward chest, and if you open that up, it can be anything from like a bucket of milk to an armor trim to a little player head that looks like a goat plushie. And the rarest reward out there is to have a goat mount that you can spawn in. Only one other player on the server was able to get it. It took them about 215 attempts to get hold of a goat.
Wow.
So I think it's about a 1 in 100 chance. I was a lot luckier. I got mine in 40 attempts. But in order to do that, I decided to try and use the resource world to my advantage. So I found an area of the resource world, maybe about 1,500 blocks out, just from naturally exploring the resource world. I didn't have the seed for it or anything. I found a mountaintop where I was able to find 4 goats. One thing I didn't realize was that there's some kind of bug on the server right now where animals won't respond to the food that is usually used to tempt them. So these goats wouldn't follow me around when I was holding up wheat for them, but they would breed using wheat. And so I thought, okay, I'll get the 2 of them to breed, and I'll try and position a boat nearby so they get stuck in a boat. And that way they won't be able to roam around too much, and I'll just be able to breed them in the boat, and they'll produce more baby goats from there. Managed to do that with 2 breeding pairs of goats. Then, realizing that I would probably just be producing goats constantly, I thought, well, if I turn this into a sort of temporary base of operations, I'll just place a ton more boats around there, and all of the other goats, as they are born, will be trapped in these boats, grow up, and then they can breed, and then I just have this kind of breeding colony of goats that's taking over this mountaintop slowly. The problem was I needed to go back to the RPG overworld to reset the quest, and it's possible to like teleport back to the overworld from anywhere in the resource world, and it will put you back in the overworld wherever you were when you last left. But when you travel back to the resource world, you are put in a random position around spawn, and then I'd have to travel 2,000 blocks to get back to my goat mountain. So what I did, which was very cheeky of me, I took as many like supplies as I could. I took all of the hay bales and stuff out there, popped it all down in a chest, set my spawn there, and then every time I warped back to the resource world and was positioned in a random place around spawn, I would just die, and then I'd warp back to where my bed was in the resource world about 2,000 blocks away. And so to everybody else on the server, it was looking like I would turn up, ask this goat guy if he needed any help, accept the quest, immediately go to the resource world and die. And I was trying to die in like a series of different ways just to make it like as baffling as possible to anybody who was observing this from the outside. So I would drown, and then I would jump in lava, and then I would suffocate in gravel, and then I would be killed by a zombie. There was a couple of them that got a bit ridiculous where I worked my health down to like have maybe a heart of health left, and then I broke a bee's nest so I would get stung by a bee and die. And the best one was that I happened to spawn really close to where a wandering trader was, so I just punched his llama and it spat at me until I died. And then I just kept doing all of these like ridiculous and baffling like mini quest things just to make it interesting for myself, because otherwise I was just death looping my way to breeding 10 goats and then coming back to the overworld and doing the same thing over and over again. But I've decided that thematically what I'm doing, in a similar way to what I was talking about previously with acquiring red sand on this server by just using the fact that the resource world resets every day, I was gamifying the resource world a little bit and abusing those mechanics to my advantage. And that's very different to how Avid, who's the only other person who got this goat mount on the server, had done it. But I think it's kind of fun that we can make different approaches to the same problems that way. It feels very in the spirit of Minecraft and everybody doing stuff slightly differently. So I had a good time with it. I'm still working up reputation with the rats, and then the last one I have to get, the one that's going to be really difficult to get, is there's about a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting a rideable wolf skeleton from the Lost Crypt dungeon, but you have to go in there and kill the wolf skeleton and hope that it drops something. So that's something only Mythical Sausage has done so far, and a few other people have been trying to grind that, and they're into like hundreds of attempts. So that's the one I'm leaving until like I have a lot of time on streams and I can just do that dungeon over and over again. But it's been a fun process so far, and sooner or later I'll end up doing some building again.
You would have really liked the mechanics of doing that in World of Warcraft. Back when I was playing that a lot in a guild with, regular dungeon runs, everybody was grinding for a mount. Like you'd have to do a certain amount of things, get certain XP. There were certain things that you could do on your own to get mounts, but some of the coolest mounts were run a dungeon enough times, get the drop if it came to you, and if you're with a guild and like someone that already had the mount would let somebody else loot the table, and then they ended up with like player specific mount or a loot instead of very similar to how Minecraft Dungeons does it. So but this was back before that was a thing, so it did make things more rare. But I can very easily see you running dungeons and trying to figure out like the most efficient way to get to this particular rare mount, in World of Warcraft. And I think it's cool that the resource world exists, and I think that it changes a lot in terms of how you approach resources and then how you approach how you play in the resource world. So for me, I feel like I would be willing to do a lot of the same sort of things where in the main world, you want to RPG, you want to build something, you want to maybe play by the rules that people have set out. But when the resource world is resetting every day, like anything that is a Minecraft mechanic that you are stretching, or I don't want to use the word abusing, but certainly using your Minecraft knowledge to your advantage where other players might not think of it. I mean, who cares? It resets every day. Like I think you've got a finite amount of time to take advantage of whatever that resource world has given you for that particular day. And I'm assuming it's on a 24-hour clock, like every day at midnight or like whatever the time is, it just like automatically resets. So like if you've got something, it's like, oh crap, like, I mean, I really need to take advantage of these goats, or I really need to take advantage of like what I've got going on here, then like, make it the most efficient way possible. And I think that's one of the fun things about Minecraft is that when you're playing these sort of like off vanilla beat server rules, then you can take some of the game mechanics and apply them in a way that sometimes we'll even hear from listeners like, oh, I really wish I could do this in vanilla, or I could do this in survival. Then you and I will often respond and like, well, that kind of like takes the survival out of survival. But in this particular case, I feel like it's a really cool use of like the video game mechanic, and I think that's the comparison I'm seeing. The resource world is a video game, and you are treating it as such. Whereas the RPG world is more of a immersive, like you're trying to forget that you're playing Minecraft. It's trying to be more immersive. It's trying to be not looking at what's under the hood so much as, just kind of that the player experience is paramount on the RPG world. Whereas it's the Jonny experience, the how can I get my job done experience on the resource world. It's really cool.
Yeah, the resource world has also been a great source of, an unexpected source, I suppose, of a bit of lighthearted trolling, because there are definitely some folks on the server who really don't like leaving floating trees on multiplayer servers, and there are some people who really don't care because the world is going to get reset tomorrow, so why would you? Just get the resources that are easily available on the ground and don't worry about mining out the entire, like, oak tree or whatever. But then I think Fwip and a couple of people will start posting angry, like, faux angry screenshots in the Misadventures Discord and just being like, who is leaving these giant, like, UFO acacia trees all over the spawn? And people are like, it's fine, it's gonna reset tomorrow, don't worry about it. And he's like, yeah, I'll find you and hit you with my diamond sword. So yeah, it's been a laugh.
Nice.
It's been really fun, and I need to spend a bit more time when I'm not isolating myself on a mountaintop breeding a million goats. I need to get more time like with other people online. I think a few people have taken a bit of a break this week, and we're thinking about updating to 1.21 soon once the mod developers have worked on that. So yeah, I think a few people are just hanging on for the next push towards making a bunch more stuff. So yeah, hopefully I'll get a chance to hang out with some of the others now that I can ride around town on my fancy new goat. What's new with you on the Citadel, Joel? How's the table and chair replacement project going?
It's actually finished.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, so I was able to get that finished this past weekend, and the west quarter took a while because those are like the mansion and the larger homes, places that have a little bit more decoration going on in like the kitchens and things like that. It took a while because I had to like move armor stands so that they didn't get deleted with the command that I was using to remove the old tables and chairs, and so it took a little while to get there. But I mean, I had the forethought of like bringing all of my wood in shulker boxes with me, and so like rather than crafting a bunch of stuff and having it in my inventory, I could just like craft extra tables and chairs as I needed and go around that way. I was able to add a few more details here and there. There was a couple of stairwells where I didn't have railings on the stairs on half of the tower, but the top tower did. So like I caught a couple of mistakes. I found a basement that I missed. Like I found a basement that just didn't have any decoration. It's really small, but like enough that I had my little book with me so I could write it down. It's like, hey, the house next to the the tower, like make sure that you go back and finish up that basement so that it's complete as a thought with everything else that's around it. And that was really, really fun. And then I went down into what I call Low Town, which is like the little kind of like low fishing kind of area that's just outside the town walls to the south, and fills up like a weird little peninsula wind in the river that I didn't want to remove. And so I had to go through all of that and put in tables and chairs. But again, that went a lot faster because some of those buildings are storage in terms of like they're just meant to be decorative or utility buildings. No one lives there, so there's no tables and chairs in them. And then those that did have tables and chairs, because of its low town, it's meant to be like poor fishing huts and stuff like that. There's like one table and one chair, so it felt like a big area, but it went by really quickly because it didn't really take that long to fix up, which was good. So one of the things that I've been able to do while I've been streaming, surprisingly, is play with complementary reimagined shaders. And I have always had them. I've used them here and there for screenshots. But while doing this tables and chairs stuff, I thought, well, I'm kind of giving a mini tour of the Citadel and the West Hill build. I'm not like stopping and admiring stuff, but as I'm going around building the building, people that haven't seen this build are seeing basically everything. And I thought, well, I'll just throw shaders on, and I'm not doing anything that requires a high frame rate. I find that if I have a low frame rate when I'm trying to build, I feel like it's hard on the eyes. but where I'm just walking around replacing tables and chairs, like, it's not that bad. But I've been able to get like between 40 and 50 frames a second while streaming with these shaders, which is normally not the case. Normally shaders for me are just like 24, maybe 30 if I'm lucky. And so it's been really cool. And what's nice about them, I didn't realize this, that some of the ways that they affect water, they give like a white pixelation around where water in a river would like have contact with the banks. So when the water is touching like the blocks on either side of the river, it gets a little bit lighter and it has like a bit of a sparkle to it. It's not pixel aligned so much in terms of what we think of when we think about vibrant visuals, but it's kind of a taste as to what we could expect with vibrant visuals. So I'm really curious now to see what's going to happen with all of that. So it's been fun to see the world with those shaders, like dive into some of the settings, maybe desaturate things a little bit, because sometimes shaders I find are quite over the top. So it's got me thinking about what's coming with vibrant visuals and what it might be like for performance-wise. You know, to have, if something from Mojang is going to be incorporated, then it could be something that could change dramatically for me, like how I play the game and how I'm able to stream the game. Because I've always wanted to be able to stream with shaders. I've watched other creators do so, but I found that my system just, it's not quite the best experience, both for me or for people viewing. So I'm hoping that with vibrant visuals, I might be able to get some more interesting stuff happening, you know, during live streams.
I think it's going to be really interesting returning to old projects, especially if, like, we know Vibrant Visuals on Java is going to be a little further away than it is for Bedrock Edition. So I can imagine you'd be perhaps moved on from West Hill by the time it releases, knowing that you haven't got much left to do on your like to-do list at this stage. And I think it'd be really fun going back and doing a tour kind of like you were doing, but with Vibrant Visuals and seeing like firsthand how it feels different to the shaders you've already taken screenshots with and used here and there, and how different it feels to just walking around with vanilla graphics, because established builds like that weren't built with the look of vibrant visuals in mind. And since you've not been playing with shaders, they're mostly not built with shaders in mind either. Thinking about the lighting touches you put in just by careful block choices in the, you know, abandoned barn you did with the hole in the roof and stuff, and
Right,
trying to
yeah.
pick lighter blocks for the areas on the floor that would be lighter because of the light coming in from the ceiling, how much that lines up with Mojang's vision of what vibrant visuals are going to look like, and compare that to the way shader pack creators have been working on their own stuff. It's going to be interesting to compare notes across multiple versions of the graphics treatment of this game with a build that's established like that and has been built with some of that stuff in mind, but not necessarily the realistic lighting angles and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I saw a post recently. I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing or watch the whole thing about potential colored lighting and stuff coming with vibrant visuals and what that possibly could mean. I don't know if it was meant to be like this was suggested to come with vanilla, or vibrant visuals may open up avenues for modders or shader pack authors to do even more than what they can do now. And what got me thinking about that was when you walk through the keep, the main hall in the keep in West Hill, there's a lot of very tall, thin blue stained glass or light blue stained glass windows. And the light that comes through isn't necessarily tinted, but each beam is separate. And the way that the shaders render that, it's like this really cool cascading 20 slots of light that come into the room. And so thinking about that with vibrant visuals and what other things you might be able to play with is really, really cool. And you're right, I am almost done with a lot of stuff in West Hill. As a matter of fact, the only thing left as far as interiors in West Hill now is the keep. So the main kind of like hall, throne room, I want to do something. I'm not going to put a bunch of tables and chairs in there, but I want to have something at the front, at the nave of the design near the river that indicates like this might be where the magistrate or whoever might be leading the town would have meetings or have people come and talk to them. And then there's like the big kitchen in the keep. And then there's the main like upper bedrooms, and like where like the staff bedrooms and stuff are. They're just placeholders. Like I've got slabs where beds should go. I've got blocks where tables should go. Like I've got to go in and decorate all that kind of stuff. But that's it. Like that's really the only interior left in West Hill. And then the only things left on the to-do list are larger projects like getting the foliage from 1.21.5 and getting like the Spruce River done on the West Bank, and there's one more building left in the valley, like just little things like that are not necessarily super detailed. They're just like things that are holes in the design that I'd like to finish up. The path that goes north to the portal, like that kind of stuff, I'd like to touch up. But we're getting real close, and I'm looking forward to checking it off because it's going to be fun to, as you said, like move on, but then also have vibrant visuals, even if I don't have access to them now, have them in mind so that when I do build something else new, either in the overworld or wherever, I can think about how vibrant visuals may affect it. I'm actually thinking about popping open either a Bedrock preview or certainly a Java snapshot the moment that vibrant visuals are available. I'd like to at least mess around with them and just kind of see what it looks like and how it feels, because I did not really have the opportunity to do that when the RTX stuff came out because I didn't have access to that kind of hardware. So it'll be really fun to experiment with that when that comes available.
For sure, yeah. I think everyone who owns Java now, on Windows PC at least, has the opportunity to open Bedrock Edition, and they effectively own both versions. So
yeah,
it's a lot more accessible to people who've not had the opportunity to dabble in Bedrock and get hold of some of this wacky new lighting stuff that they're working on. But yeah, exciting times. I'm now imagining a sort of the sentimental final episode of a sitcom where like the cast is just kind of like looking around before they turn the lights off one final time. I'm imagining that with West Hill, but it takes you like an entire stream of just going around and snuffing out all of the candles and things like that. But no, I imagine and then like the Minecraft equivalent of that sitcom episode is they turn all the lights off and then mobs just start spawning and they have to run away. But yeah, maybe Minecraft movie part 2 can co-opt an idea like that. Who knows? Yeah. We should probably get into the news, though, because speaking of vibrant visuals, there is a little bit of an update on that. But first of all, we have a Java snapshot. So take us away, Joel.
On April 15th, last Tuesday, we got Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W16A, and there were, of course, some changes in this snapshot. They changed leash mechanics, changed elytra, so that while gliding, using a firework will only be used as a boost, even if placed on a block. Clouds now exist all the way to the horizon, and they reverted a fix for MC 101556. Nether portal teleport range is too large, equivalent to a full block. There's a developer note here. After consideration, we have decided to revert this change as it came in quite late in the snapshot cycle and unintentionally broke some functionality that our community was relying on. We'd like to revisit this at some point when we have time to deal with the issues that showed up due to this change. Under leash changes, leashes are now rendered twice as thick to match Bedrock. Leashes can now be used to leash 2 mobs together. Sneak interact on any mob while holding a bunch of leashes. Mobs will then leash 2 other mobs and the interacted entity. You cannot leash anything to itself. If the releashing an entity would result in an immediate leash snapping due to distance, the releashing would not happen. Leashes can be snipped from an entity when interacting them with shears. This applies to its own leash connection as well as entities attached to it. Dispensers can now snip leashes from entities in front of them while they are equipped with shears. Improved leash mechanics with reworked leash physics, allowing for more stable leash connections, especially when leashed entities are not on the ground. When dragged on a leash, leashed objects will now orient themselves towards the leasher. Using a firework rocket when flying with leashes will now break the leash connections. When leashing an already leashed mob, the current leash will now snap and a player will releash the object to yourself. You cannot steal leashed entities from other players. Interactions with a leash knot and fence blocks have changed. When interacting with a leash knot or fence block, if there are any players' leashed entities in range of the leash knot, they will be releashed to the leash knot or fence block. In case attaching of mobs fails due to distance or there is no object to attach, the player will now transfer all fence leashed entities to itself. If there is nothing left attached to the leash knot, it disappears. Sneak interact can only result in attaching of players to mobs of the fence. Interacting with shears or punching the leash knot will result in all current connections broken. Boats and large mobs can be leashed, but cannot fit in the boat. Horses, donkeys, mules, camels, and sniffers can now be leashed in a special 4-leash configuration to a happy ghast. Happy ghasts will also present a custom layer when it is leashed something using a quad connection. Leashed in quad connections are now rendered without slack. Leash snapping distance has been changed from 10 to 12 blocks, the distance between centers of entities' bounding boxes rather than their feet used to determine the distance between two leashed entities. Ghast leash is now longer, with free roaming distance of 10 blocks and a leash snapping distance of 16 blocks. Some technical changes in 25W16A. The data pack version is now 73. One change to custom paintings, which no longer accept inline variants. The resource pack version is now 57. All core shader uniforms are now uniform blocks. The cloud texture, clouds.png, can no longer be colored, and block model rotations are no longer limited to multiples of 22.5. More details, including a lot of information about the changes to core shaders, are available in the Minecraft.net changelog. Some fixed bugs of note. Loading a custom structure doesn't load rails correctly. The volume level between grass and dirt is inconsistent. Entities interacting differently with nether portals. Happy ghasts produce footstep sounds when flying close to blocks. Kicked for flying while riding a happy ghast. Sounds produced by ghaslings can be heard from too far away. Happy ghasts move or spin erratically when leashed to a fence, and unable to see items when hovering over them inside of a bundle. All of those have been fixed along with many others. If you want a full detail, you can go to the Minecraft.net changelog, which is linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
I bet you're happy to be released from reading that changelog. There's a lot. There's a lot going on in there.
Yes.
I had that one cooking the entire time you were reading that. Well played. I think a round of applause for Joel for dealing with that. It was a tongue twister of a changelog. In the meantime, I have some slightly different news that we've already talked about a little bit. An update about vibrant visuals on Java Edition was published over on Minecraft.net on April 16th. These are going to be a series of quotes, so I'll read these all to you. Quote, Java Edition is where Minecraft began, and now we're working on rebuilding the code in a way that will not only support visual updates like vibrant visuals, but future enhancements too, without sacrificing stability or performance. Our focus is on the sustainability of Java Edition, and so the first step we're taking to prepare for vibrant visuals on Java is refactoring, which means we're separating our gameplay code from our rendering code and bringing the latter up to date with more modern approaches to rendering. Once this is complete, we'll implement a modern rendering pipeline that will give us a strong foundation to build upon, making visual changes and performance improvements easier in the future, for us and modders too. After that, we will be able to start adding the visual features. We really want to take this time to build this properly for Java Edition and build it in a way that allows us to continue to add complex enhancements such as vibrant visuals to Java in the future. Rather than saving up our improvements for one big release, we'll be releasing them as soon as they're ready, first in snapshots and then full releases, so players will get to experience them as quickly as possible. That means you'll see us making changes and implementing improvements in our code. In fact, eagle-eyed players may have noticed that we started laying the groundwork for rewriting our rendering code last year. Our focus throughout is going to be on performance, impact, and stability. We want to ensure that the game runs smoothly, even with vibrant visuals, and a lot of the work we'll be doing will be around assessing the impact vibrant visuals has on performance across different Java Edition devices. End quote. For now, Vibrant Visuals are still available for testing in Bedrock Edition, beta, and preview, but the article goes on to say that they will be using that version to iterate on the look of Vibrant Visuals, and those changes will be reflected when it comes to Java Edition. To read the full article, please head on over to Minecraft.net, or you can find it linked in this week's show notes over at thespawnchunks.com.
Something that I was thinking about the whole time reading that news read, which I can't remember. When did we switch from calling leads leashes?
See, I think they are referred to in-game as leads, but I think the terms are sort of used interchangeably because to leash is still like the verb, I feel like, and so when they're talking about leashing something to something else, that makes sense. You don't necessarily talk about leading something to a fence post. So I think maybe they're using the same word throughout for the sake of, I don't know, clarity of some kind. But you're right. I did sort of glaze over halfway through the news read just with how often it used the word leash and how Like, it just starts to... It's one of those things you read a word a bunch of times, and then it starts to not look like a word after a while. So, yeah,
Loses all meaning, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, fair play for getting through all of that. The more positive side of that is that I have tried out these mechanics. I went looking for the Happy Ghast in Survival last week in the 15A snapshot, and I finished my video about it during the 16A snapshot period. So I started by going and finding a Happy Ghast, a dried Ghast in the Nether, and raising it from a Ghastling into a Happy Ghast. And around the same time I was trying to rehydrate the dried Ghast, they dropped the new snapshot, and all of the changes to leads, all of the leashing mechanics are really solid, especially in the way that they've implemented it with the Happy Ghast being able to carry things. They are effectively hot air balloons now, in a similar way to how you might expect to have seen them after having watched the Minecraft movie, with the exception that we don't get the hanging from the basket underneath and still steering. Like, you're still riding the Ghast on top of it. It's a strange way of doing it, but then you don't get the, poke them in the tentacles behavior that we saw in the Minecraft movie. And I think the overall look of it, the fact that the leads are attached at the four corners of the boat, or apparently if you want to airlift a horse, you can do that too, and the four leads will attach like underneath the belly of the horse, or you can lift a sniffer that way as well. I think it looks fantastic. I think there's something that they've done with the physics of leads, and I think it also has to do with the entity rotation changes that they've made, makes it feel so fluid and dynamic, and it looks really good in a way that I didn't expect to be saying about a Minecraft feature, but something about it feels so natural. And then you're seeing a Ghast with this brightly colored harness. It already looks a little bit like a hot air balloon anyway, but it's just the extra step of being able to have this basket hanging from below it that's really, really good. I feel like they're going to be the go-to mob transport solution, especially vertically. The horizontal speed at which they travel is still pretty slow, but I can imagine if you want to get a villager up to build height to trade with them, it's going to be much more possible with a Happy Ghast if you want to get that advancement. And that's just looking at it from like a purely technical advancement challenge perspective. I found out that they could be used to move chest boats as well, and not only that, but you can string up multiple chest boats below them. You don't just have to be stuck to one boat attached on a lead, you can have multiple things dangling from below a Ghast, and I don't think that affects their travel speed or anything like that. So in theory, you could now use a Happy Ghast similar to a llama caravan, or even like an ender chest with shulker boxes in and stuff, like as a solution for moving equipment around, building blocks. If you want to carry your base with you and live a more nomadic lifestyle, bringing a Happy Ghast with you and using it for transport is a very real possibility. And obviously we've seen that change some of the existing mechanics that players relied upon a little bit. Like, I think a lot of people have been a bit miffed that they've made firework rockets and leads mechanically incompatible. This was kind of finicky already in my experience, but my hope was that it would be made more robust and not removed entirely. I think we also have a listener email about this, because this is our Chunk Mail Dispenser episode, so I won't discuss the entire thing here, but I do think there are some mechanics that they've added and some mechanics that have had to go as almost like a compromise for them, making leads more robust in their behavior. I've already seen people talk about leashing Ghasts together and having them fly around in this kind of like centipede-style convoy. I think that's a really fun idea. Even just flying around with a snowball and having the Ghasts follow you seems to work really well. And the main obstacle to using them right now is that they're slow. But I'm wondering if maybe people want enough like movement tech to be part of flying a Happy Ghast around. Maybe they implement something like the warped fungus on a stick for a strider. Maybe they have a snowball on a stick that melts as you fly it around, and maybe they can be prompted to go a little faster using mechanics like that. But either way, my overall first impression of the Happy Ghast in general was great, and it's only gotten better since they've improved these lead mechanics.
I think they look really cool. I like the idea of hanging stuff underneath a Ghast, and even if it's not something you can travel at speed with horizontally, like you said, like having recently moved a bunch of villagers just up, 20, 30 blocks as I was doing the iron farm on the server. You had to build a minecart thing, and like you didn't want them to drop. Like, it would be so much easier to just get a villager in a boat, bring it up with a happy Ghast, drop it where you need it to be. You don't have to like tear down the rails anymore. Like it's a lot of really cool advantages to moving mobs around when you can leash a boat. Or as you mentioned, like with larger mobs like the sniffer, like you can just leash the whole sniffer to the bottom of the Ghast, which is a very funny visual to begin with, right?
Yeah.
I'm assuming pandas are probably the same way, or do pandas fit in boats?
I think pandas do go in boats, in my experience, unless that's changed recently, but I don't think they're quite large enough. Which is weird because I feel like horses are slimmer, so it feels like horses should go in boats, but I think that's also something to do with like them being rideable and a passenger of a passenger and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Pandas are sort of their own thing and are less rideable.
Yeah. Pandas have just got that funny stubby leg look, and they would just look very cute, kind of like suspended.
Yeah,
without a care in the world.
You could airdrop a panda somewhere. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, it looked kind of fun. But you know, even when you're thinking about like you mentioned a chest boat, like you can still fill that chest boat with shulker boxes. And so like,
absolutely.
if you need to get that amount of gear up higher, I mean, think about what that does for Skyblock. You know, like if you're going to be using Happy Ghasts and Skyblock, think about what that means in vertical builds in general, where you just need to get a lot of stuff up higher. In terms of, I mean, yes, you've got your own inventory, but I feel like there's some things that, you know, you might want to bring en masse with a Happy Ghast, and even in like the Nether, you know, like for people that want to break the Nether roof and you have to do some real big technical builds up there. If you decide to make a big enough hole for a Happy Ghast to get through, then again, you're going to have the ease of not only bringing stuff with you with these new leashes on a Happy Ghast, but you also have the advantage that we talked about last week, which is being able to build while standing on a movable platform in essentially a void. You know, if you're above the Nether, if you're in the end, you know, if you've got even just a large build over an ocean where it's just a pain in the butt to try to get scaffolding to stick to anything, I think that there's really going to be some advantages with the Happy Ghast, and I like the visuals of it. I haven't messed around with the leads or leashes personally, but I like most of the mechanics. I think the only thing that's disappointing from a builder perspective is that when you unleash something from a fence post, the leash knot disappears.
Yeah,
I read that. I was like, ugh. You guys were so close. You were so close to letting us push a rope around a fence post, which has so many cool decorative like possibilities in terms of like add a dock or even just adding some geometry to something that you're building. And I was like, well, I mean, I guess from a technical side, it makes sense to have it pop off. But it's like I was really hoping that we'd be able to use it in a way that would be also decorative and not just functional. Because like I really can't remember the last time that I needed to leash an entity and move it around. I know it's been for technical builds, like moving things into farms, moving things into position for trading or something like that. Not trading because you can't leash villagers, but like that kind of like moving things around, entities that you are able to leash. That would be the last time I used them. I didn't really use them for like fun. You know what I mean? It was always like in the light of a technical build. So it's curious to see how it's going to be used. I like the idea of leashing multiple animals together. And so if you don't have anything to leash an animal to, like you have a leash, but you don't have a fence post, or you need to quickly like leash an animal to something so it doesn't go too far, leashing two sheep together in your early days of Minecraft means that they might just not go as far. And so you can kind of keep an eye on things, and I think that's interesting. We'll have to see what uses players come up with, but I think that's a cool addition to just kind of like, well, now you can kind of leash them together. I do find that the leash on a Happy Ghast is still kind of strange, like the way that it attaches to the Ghast, like when you're trying to lead it around, not the four, but just the one.
Yeah.
Just the way that the leashes go to the center of the entity is a little bit strange for me. But I don't know how difficult it would be to have it always attached to like a collar or something, right? Like we did. I'm not sure how that would work from a technical standpoint, but yeah, other than that, I think things look good.
Yeah, like visually it is a little strange when it's just like tied to something in the middle of a Ghast and you can't really tell what it is, but like where's the solid part. Yeah, I'm in love with the Happy Ghast aesthetically as far as like the delivery mechanisms of it go. Like imagine if you're on a server and you want to deliver stuff by air, and with a chest boat underneath it, you could have something like a chimney, but with a hopper at the top of it. And all the players need to do is land the chest boat on top of that hopper, and then the contents could drain out because the chest boat will still interact. And then once it's done unloading, you could just fly away with it again, right? And you could have like a Santa Claus style delivery mechanism that way, where you drop stuff down the chimney for people. Like there's all sorts of fun mechanics like that start to suggest themselves when you have stuff like this. And it's not the most amazing thing in the world. Like, you could probably set up like slime block launchers to launch a boat that way, and you could set up ways of doing that already. But just the fact that players have been given access to something that feels more alive like this, I think, is a really fun idea. I can imagine servers just having so much fun with these things. So yeah, I'm personally really hoping that we do Minecraft Misadventures for long enough that we can actually bring the Happy Ghast into that world, because it would go really well with my whole Sky Pirate idea and having like hot air balloons and stuff, and like dirigibles floating around, and like Happy Ghasts transporting stuff with boats. Could revolutionize the mail system, could do all kinds of stuff with it. So yeah, like I like the idea of them being used as like a friendly way to drop off supplies. You could even load them up if you have something that a Happy Ghast could like fly into and dock there, and then maybe there's hoppers that lead into where the chest boat is dangling underneath it. Mm-hmm. Like I can think of all kinds of like fun loading and unloading stations that you could build with these, and I think they're a massive buff to chest boats. Like, I genuinely think the chest boat benefits from this way more than I ever expected it to benefit from any sort of feature implementation. So yeah, I think a lot of people are going to dwell on the fact that leads and firework rockets are now mechanically incompatible with each other, and that's fair. I do wonder if that's something that they will take another look at. And outside of that, like, the only other news this week we're really talking about here is Vibrant Visuals, which we've already kind of litigated a little bit in the opening to this and chatting about that. I think it's really interesting, though, to hear that they have made moves towards multi-threading for Java. If the rendering is going to be done on a completely separate thread than the gameplay. And that's something that people have wanted in Java Edition for a while, because Bedrock Edition has much better performance because of it. But I think one of the reasons that gameplay code wasn't suited for multi-threading was because it would lead to Redstone behaving differently. Redstone on Bedrock is not deterministic, and so it doesn't always produce the same results because bits of it are calculated at different speeds by the CPU, is my understanding of it, at least. I'm probably oversimplifying how this works, but yeah, I think the idea is that rendering could take place on a completely separate thread of the GPU or the CPU, allowing for gameplay and rendering to happen independently of each other, but not interfere with the way mechanically Minecraft works right now, which means kind of freeing up resources across the board, which is exciting. And that's obviously been something that I think has really developed more as a technology in the 15 years since Minecraft has been developed, so it makes sense that they weren't necessarily prepared for that when Minecraft was originally invented, and since then they've had to modernize some of the technology underpinning the whole thing. So I'm excited to hear more about that. I believe there is talk of, there's a Discord out there that some of the developers have started that's a kind of a read-only Discord if you want to keep track of some of that stuff. I think that's especially going to be important for people who are interested in making resource packs and shaders and figure out how existing shaders are going to be made compatible with the new rendering pipeline. So that's out there. Obviously, information about that has been shared. You'll know where to find it if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But if anything else comes up about this, we'll be sure to cover it on the show in future.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes. Like I'm curious to see something like this being developed with Java Edition in the same way that gameplay editions are. Like here's the start of it. It's not like they're going to have it completely rendered and ready to go. They want player feedback. They want feedback from technical players and people that like to get under the hood. So it's going to be interesting to see how people talk about its performance or talk about the gameplay experience and what tweaks they make. And it'll be cool to see their reasoning behind those changes. In the same way that we get developer notes in our newsread about gameplay changes, we're like, well, this was a change we made a little bit late in the snapshot cycle. It affected some players in a way that we didn't anticipate, so we're going to roll it back and look at this a little bit harder. I'm wondering if we're going to get those kind of things where, well, we added this part of Vibrant Visuals and it's either affected performance, or people are like not really liking the way that things are shiny right now, so we're going to reduce the shine, or we're going to we're going to turn off the shine right now and we'll come back to that later. So I'm curious to see what they're going to try to do. What is going to be like a litmus test of this is sitting really well with players versus this is really jarring for players. And I hope that people can send the feedback in an articulate way, in that like not all change is bad. Like just because you don't like the way that Vibrant Visuals looks, you don't have to use them. You know, I feel like if there's something like that, that people can be constructive, because I feel like it is a big change. Like the footage that I've seen online in Minecraft for Vibrant Visuals, it really does feel different. And so I think that it will be especially, I don't want to say jarring, but maybe an adjustment for longtime players that are just so used to vanilla Minecraft looking the way that it does now.
Yeah, I'm curious to see which version, like if people still gravitate to vanilla like default graphics for the sake of nostalgia or clarity or whatever kind of preferences they have over the sort of glossier look that Vibrant Visuals gives, and which one sort of wins out long term as technology continues to progress and more freely available kind of computer hardware means that the performance concerns sort of fade away and can continue to modernize Minecraft over time. Yeah, it's still really interesting to be part of that landscape during such a crucial time in Minecraft's development. And it feels like the team is doing such a good job of taking player feedback on these days, both with gameplay features and with stuff like Vibrant Visuals, that I expect that dialogue is going to be really important to how it's shaped in the near future.
Speaking of feedback, we've got some email this week. This is going to be our chunk mail dispenser for April. This is where we forgo the main discussion and just read a few extra emails on the podcast. If you'd like to email the show, the email address is spunchunkmail@gmail.com. Please use that email address and keep your messages short to the point if you can. It does help us include them in the episode, as well as on recent topics. Like if you've got feedback for us on an episode, if you've got feedback for recent news, it really does help us with like that conversation and keeping that flowing. It's really cool to hear from listeners talking about current stuff that's happening in the game and on the show. And Johnny's got the first email this week.
Yes, this one comes in from Joey3663 with the subject of creeper variants. Hi, Pixelriffs and Joel. I believe the Spring to Life update had a chance of being even better with creeper variants. The most common hostile mobs have variants, such as zombies, skeletons, and spiders. However, the creeper has none. I believe Mojang could make a leaf litter type creeper, knowing Notch said that they are made of leaves. This could be a mob found in all types of forests. All in all, I believe creepers could get a bit more love. Joey3663 heard hissing from behind, exploring the new creepers.
I wonder at this point if the creeper is more of an icon in Minecraft rather than just like an average hostile mob, in the same way that Mickey Mouse is an icon for Disney.
Sure.
Now, that's not to say that Mickey Mouse hasn't changed over the years. You look at Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse versus modern Mickey Mouse, they look very different. But the overall silhouette and shape and stuff of Mickey has been the same. And the creeper is just used in so much merchandise and so much, even just like graphic design and identity of Minecraft Online, that granted, I feel like it is the face of the creeper, like the shape of the eyes and the mouth, as opposed to the actual colors that are used in a lot of the online branding. I do still think that any opportunities to update the creeper are probably something that Mojang is going to shy away from. I agree with Joey, though. Like, I think that it is something that could be possible, especially when we've seen those variants for chickens and cows, and there's been variants for zombies and skeletons and other, mobs in the game for a long time. And I do remember playing, I feel like it might have been all of Fabric 5, but at some point I played where there was a bunch of creeper variants. It was either a bunch of different texture types, or the creeper itself would just change its texture based on what it was in front of. But I do remember seeing sand creepers, and I say that seeing loosely because it was very difficult to see them. And I think that might be the other thing as to why Mojang may not want to do it, because the creepers are bright green, and every now and again they can sort of be camouflaged in like a meadows biome, but it's still pretty easy to see them. But if you start having brown creepers and sand colored creepers and snow colored creepers, I think the problem there might be a player experience that is undesirable, especially with younger players, where they're constantly getting blown up by creepers that they just don't see coming because they're, like the Predator, they just completely transform into their environment. So I think that might be one of the hangups as to why we're not seeing creeper variants. I like the idea. I think it just might be for every player of Minecraft, knowing how broad the player base is. I think it might be something where really skilled players might be like, yeah, make it harder. And then everybody else is like, no, I don't want more of these around my build. Please and thank you.
I completely agree. I think that was the first thought I had too, was I can understand why they haven't implemented better camouflage for creepers, even though I think from a biological perspective, it makes perfect sense, and it's one of the better ideas that I've seen implemented in the community through mods or resource packs or whatever. I think Mojang maybe prefers not to add too much stealth to what is otherwise the most destructive mob in the game, mostly. I think the iconography of a creeper is maybe too strong to change altogether, but I think it could stand some variance. Like, it could be possible. You make the Mickey Mouse comparison, I think about the amount of times they've changed Mickey Mouse's outfit for various franchises, but he's still recognizable, right? So I think there's room for it in there. I do also wonder if maybe because the creeper has been so iconic since the early stages of the game, when the modding scene developed, that was one of the first mods that people were interested in making, was a variant of creeper of some kind, because it feels unique to Minecraft in a way that zombies and skeletons feel like generic video game enemies. So I wonder if perhaps there are so many mod-created variants out there that there are too few original ideas left for the vanilla development team. I've certainly seen some creative takes on creepers that would be fun in vanilla, but maybe the development team doesn't want to tread on the modding community's toes in that respect. I will push back a little bit on one aspect of this, the idea that they are made of leaves. While that's something that I think has been out there for a while, that, you know, Notch originally developed them and said he imagined them being made out of leaves and making a kind of rustling noise, and maybe that rustling together is the thing that kind of sparks a fire that causes them to explode. The Minecraft movie had a different take on the creeper. It was still organic and grassy looking, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was made of leaves in the same way that like leaf litter appears. So I think there's maybe some sort of biological, I guess, ambiguity to the creeper that doesn't necessarily mean it's a shoo-in for leaf litter and that's the obvious choice. Like, I do kind of wonder what would happen if they suited them more to like having a more barky kind of look to them and have them blend in with trees rather than just with grass and the ground around them. But then that's also the direction you're going to be looking at them from, so it makes sense for them to blend in chameleon-like with their surroundings. The problem is I don't think Mojang wants to do that because players don't want their builds to blow up all the time.
Yeah. They do sort of look like they have a ghillie suit in the Minecraft movie. You know, they do feel like they have the environment that they're walking through kind of like coating them, as opposed to being their own sort of creature with a coloring similar. It really did look like they were covered in turf. And I liked that they were hollow. Like when the creeper in the movie sort of sparked, you can kind of see inside of it. So while it looked like a face, it also sort of felt like an anglerfish with the like the little like bioluminescent thing out in front of it. Like, I don't necessarily know if the creeper face was the creeper face. Like, maybe it's something like a lure that's like way up above the body of the creeper, which is of course on the ground. The thing that I really liked about the Minecraft movie was the way that it moved and the way that the legs moved. It's something that I like about, I can't remember what the texture pack is, but there's a resource pack where it adds like a smooth animations to a lot of Minecraft mobs.
Yeah, Fresh Animations is the name of it. It's pretty widely used. Yeah. And
so when you make a creeper look like it moves like a spider as opposed to like a treadmill with blocks, like I feel like that adds something to it. And I could see them maybe adding something to the mechanics of a creeper before I see them changing the texture. Like, I could see creeper movement maybe increasing. You know, I've played other games recently, platformers and stuff on Xbox, where a very similar character is like, it basically rushes up to you and explodes, but it basically looks like it's rooted in place until it sees you, and then it pops up. And because they're modern games, the animation is very kind of over the top, and it kind of like makes a funny noise and then kind of does a little hop and then runs right at you. And I could see that with creepers, where instead of like creeping right up next to you, I could see a variant of a creeper that might charge at you. Like, imagine a creeper that has red eyes or something that is a different kind of creeper. Like, that's a fast creeper, kind of like a chicken jockey versus a zombie, like that kind of a thing. I could see that coming into the game, as opposed to like them changing the way that it looks. But something you mentioned about creepers and like a bark texture did make me think, like, rather than having the whole creeper change, if they did add a variant where maybe only the back of the creeper changed. So like you could have a creeper that maybe was up against a tree and you wouldn't know it until it turned around to look at you. And then it would be
it's
green
like half
in the
and
face.
half. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were looking at it from the wrong angle, it would look like it's part of the tree. And I keep on thinking about like any sci-fi movie where there's been like large insects that are up on trees and the camera goes by, and it's not until they move that you, the viewer, realize that is a animal that's coming off of the tree. And I could see that with like creepers being up against trees, and then as you get closer, part of the tree kind of like turns around and comes towards you with a bright green face. And I could see that with other things like a stone creeper, a bark creeper. I mean, insert your favorite texture in the game here, and have it be something that the creeper could do, like dirt. But I feel like that would be like an interesting halfway point where the face of the creeper remains the same, the iconography remains the same, but they have like a different back texture that they could change. Like the three sides that are not the face could be different in a different environment. That might be an interesting way to approach this.
Creeper's just wearing like a camouflage hoodie kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it just like turns around to reveal itself. Yeah, who knows? I mean, there's at least, again, an interesting idea for a resource pack or two in there.
Our next email comes from Curtis Does a Dig, and it is about Lead to Victory. Hi, Pix and Joel. The newest Snapshot just came out, and there have been a lot of changes to leads. There are a lot of amazing changes that I'm really happy about. However, there are some that I'm not a big fan of, such as fireworks boosting automatically breaking the lead. I was hoping they would actually make leads stronger and allow for firework bursts to keep the lead attached. So I was a bit unenthused when they did the opposite. I would love to get your thoughts on this and ask if there have been changes made in the past that have felt similar to you. Much love, Curtis Does a Dig. I like your username, Curtis. That's fun.
Yeah, doing a dig. Yeah, I like that. That's very Minecraft. This is something that I touched on briefly after the news read. In my experience, there's currently, in the current release version where they haven't implemented these changes yet, there is a lot of finesse and skill required to keep leashed mobs, or in most cases boats, from breaking in the current release. And I would love for it to be more reliable, but I'm also fine with it reliably breaking, because at least it's a defined behavior and not a physics accident. I think you get the impression dragging stuff around on a lead that it's going to work fine, and then if you fly into the air and it breaks every time, then you understand, oh, okay, that's probably the limitation of this. And I think through careful sort of finagling of it, and like launching from a platform and starting a glide before you fly with fireworks and that kind of stuff, like players have figured out subtle ways of making sure the lead physics don't get completely overwhelmed by firework boosting. But the fact that it's inconsistent in its approach is one of the things that I'm much happier with it being a flat yes or no than I am with all of the nuance and the frustration that comes with having to try repeatedly and try and fail until you stumble upon like the right technique for it. I think it's also important to address that elytra and boats and leads are not fundamentally incompatible across the board, because you can still reach a really high point and then glide using a boat and a lead, and that doesn't disconnect it. It's only if you right-click with a firework to boost yourself that it becomes disconnected. So I'm wondering if that's going to lead to a new revolution in player launchers. We've seen a lot of people do cool stuff with wind charges lately, and I'm not certain if the wind charge impacting the boat and the player at different points might lead to a lead snapping because of the stretch in the lead, or like how it calculates all of that stuff. But even things like slime block launchers, or even something like pulling the thing up a scaffold that goes to build height and then being able to glide from there, that kind of stuff is still possible for short range trips. So I think there's still potential for players to mess around with those mechanics without having to involve fireworks in it, and the fact that it's still possible to fly with boats that way at all, I think, is a good thing. I'm mostly just curious to see if this is going to be a permanent change, because I've seen it in the past where they've implemented something, and whether due to player feedback or just because they were still working on some of the solutions to under-the-hood problems, the Happy Ghast might be the intended solution for mob transport from now on, and they're never going to correct this behavior of elytra and firework boosts snapping leads when you use them. Or it may just be a problem they haven't resolved yet with the new lead physics, at which point they could re-implement that as more robust behavior, and then everybody's happy. But I think it's good for now to get people interested in the idea of using the Happy Ghast as mob transport instead of codifying something to immediately make what they want people to use the Happy Ghast for obsolete right away. So I think maybe there's a bit of room for nuance in there. But I do think we're not cut off from a variety of options entirely. It's just the most straightforward one that players were used to has now been codified as something that can't happen as easily.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the idea of grabbing like a sheep on a lead and boosting away with a rocket and having that come with you, to me, just wouldn't make sense in terms of it operating as the player would anticipate it working. And I think the technical bit behind that, like the physics of how they want leads to work when you're walking around on the ground, the elasticity of them, how they work connected to other mobs. Like the moment that you say, all right, well, you're allowed to jump off and boost with a rocket with a sheep attached. Well, what if you've got 4 sheep attached? What if you've got 1 sheep attached to you and other sheep attached to the sheep now? Like there's just all kinds of different variations that I don't think it makes a lot of sense to have that. Also, I don't imagine what the use case would be other than just like wanting to move a mob faster, at which point I would argue taking it through the nether and using the nether to transport something a lot farther would be maybe even faster. I don't know. I prefer the rigidity and reliability of the leash on a Ghast, in the way that they've implemented it. And they say that, when you do the 4 leads on a Ghast, it becomes like a static thing. It's not going to bounce around. And I remember, I think it was ZF did something on Hermitcraft a few seasons ago where they had like a mini game where they were trying to like glide with sheep and see how far you can get them to go.
Yeah.
And I mean, while a fun mini game, it seemed to be very tricky and very unreliable. And I feel like there was a lot of frustration in the fun that they were trying to make for themselves on the server. And I think that I would rather have leashes act in a rule set. Like I want them to have, like you said, a very well-defined experience. And for me, I think that Ghasts with entities and or boats are a happy medium when you're wanting to haul something around. Like I feel like the balance in survival is just like, yeah, you can haul a lot of stuff. Sacrifice. It's going to be slow. Like you and I were talking earlier about a chest boat full of shulker boxes. Well, you know what's faster? Loading yourself up with shulker boxes and grabbing your elytra and boosting wherever you want. It's just not as fun or as interesting. So pick your poison. Like if you want to move a mob around at speed, then like just pick something that's not a happy Ghast. Like it's probably going to be faster horizontally to just leash the mob and walk with it than it is going to be to use the happy Ghast. So do that way. I feel like the expectation or the weird part of the way that leashes work or have worked in the past, this might be me conflating the two versions, but like you kind of expect to take off with the rocket and then have the leash work like in a rubber band, at which point the sheep would shoot past you because it's on like a yo-yo string. It's like I just feel the technical side of that would just be all kinds of bananas. And I feel like players might want this. I don't think it would perform the way that you think. I don't think it would be nearly as reliable as what you said, having a clear rule that no, the moment that you boost, leash is gone. Like it's just, that's the consistent rule in the world, and I prefer that for sure.
Yeah, I think that it's better that it works consistently than that it sort of half works. I think that's the main thing about it. So yeah, I am for now pretty committed to seeing the Happy Ghast through and considering that the go-to approach for mob transport. And I think the stuff that it would have a hard time transporting, I feel like players in general would have a hard time transporting, like hostile mobs. You can imagine, like, you pick up a skeleton in a boat, it's shooting at the underside of the Ghast, trying to shoot at the player, but then, the player is not going to have an easy time moving a skeleton around in a boat if you're flying with elytra to begin with. I recently tried to move a bunch of frogs to my froglight farm via the overworld so that they could go into a nether portal and come straight out at the bastion where I'd built the magma cube farm. And yeah, that was frustrating because dragging all 3 of the boats behind me with 2 each of the different variants of frogs, that was not working out for me, carrying all of them at once. I had to end up moving them one at a time. But if I could just strap all 3 to a happy Ghast and have a slightly slower flight over there with less of the frustration, then that would be much more amenable to me. At least I could, switch my brain off for 20 minutes while the Ghast flew, and I could, not have the stress of worrying where I dropped some frogs in the middle of like a jungle where there might be a lava pit below or something like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for slow and steady winning the race in this respect. Speaking of Ghasts, Dragon Master Dan writes in with our 3rd email, with the subject being suspicious Ghasts. Hello, I was listening to episode 343 and had a thought to make the dried Ghasts less of an abrupt change. What if there was suspicious soul sand or soul soil buried around the fossil structures, which has a fairly high chance of dropping a dried Ghast? Maybe other drops could be similar to piglin bartering or some other soul or Ghast-related items. This can relate the happy Ghast to the ancient civilizations through archaeology, like the Sniffer, rather than just appearing randomly in the Soul Sand Valley. Or add lore to the fossils, making the remains of a parent to the dried Ghast, which is why it imprints on you when you rehydrate it. Thoughts? Dragon Master Dan was fireballed by a grumpy Ghast while digging for a friend.
I like the idea of calling Ghasts grumpy Ghasts now, as
the
opposed to
ones.
happy Ghasts.
Yeah.
The grumpy ones. Yeah, 100%. Are dry Ghasts an abrupt change? I don't think they're that abrupt. I didn't see them coming, but I don't think it's like a jarring change to Minecraft. I think where you find them sort of makes sense. Like they kind of blend in, they kind of don't. Like you can... Knowing where to look for them, I think, is part of the vibe in terms of what Mojang was going for. And while I haven't gone looking for the dry Ghast and snapshots, I know you have.
Mm-hmm.
Are they more difficult to find than, say, crafting one? Like, because you can see Ghasts fair enough, like easy enough in the Nether. If you have the ability to kill Ghasts and collect the tiers, like, is it faster to do that, or is it faster just to find a Soul Sand Valley and collect a couple of the dried Ghasts?
I think it's kind of either. Like, you can, if you can't find a Soul Sand Valley, get hold of Ghasts, and, you just need a bone block aside from that, and you don't need to find a Soul Sand Valley to get a bone block, so you can just kill a couple of skeletons in the overworld and get one of those. So the farming approach is entirely viable. I think what the Soul Sand Valley generation of them does is it signposts the fact that they exist at all,
right.
Which players who don't use the crafting recipe book all that much might not be aware that they are craftable in the first place, even when they get the recipe pop up for picking up a Ghast tier, which is presumably like end crystal and then little dried Ghast guy and then some brewing recipes. But I think having them there in the Soul Sand Valley, I agree with you. I think they are fairly subtle in how they appear. It almost feels like they're hiding behind the bone structure. Like they don't want to bother anyone. They just want to sit there and sulk. And it's kind of cute in that respect. I think while I like the notion of expanding archaeology, I think the dried Ghast, even though it's a block before it's an entity, is intended to feel like alive. And so the idea that they're buried in a block like that and you kind of have to dig them up feels a little strange for something that's still living after a fashion. I think discovering it in the snapshot felt natural enough, and I think it's good to have both an option to go out and find them, as well as later on an option to craft them for players who aren't going to be able to get hold of one on a busier multiplayer server. I think the frustration around the archaeology mechanic as well is that players would be unlikely to get a dried Ghast as a reward right away. And similar to digging up sniffer eggs or, looking for specific pottery sherds, if you just get like a fire charge or something comes out of the ground, you're going to get frustrated with that pretty quickly. And I think that's part of the problem with the archaeology mechanic in general, is that a lot of the stuff that comes out of it, players who are looking for loot or looking for a specific item are just going to throw away and consider junk, which is not what they wanted from archaeology. When we spoke to Archeo Plays on the show, they pointed out that part of the job of archaeologists is to discover things that are relatively mundane, but build up an image of what the world around them is like. And if the dried Ghast is such an important thing for player mechanics, where the sniffer is fairly neutral on that kind of stuff, like you get a couple of extra flowers from it, but really what you get is the experience of reinvigorating this extinct species, I think the dried ghast is so mechanically important for its evolution into the happy ghast that players are going to want to get hold of it quickly and are then going to consider that the priority, which means they deprioritize all of the extra stuff. And that's not what Mojang wants to come out of archaeology as a mechanic. They want that holistic look at all of these things that are part of the lore of the area, and not just, hey, here's that one thing I want and here's a bunch of junk that I'll just throw into the lava nearby, right? I think that's fundamentally why archaeology doesn't feel like the right mechanic. I think players would then just jump to the crafting recipe, since it would be a faster way of getting hold of it rather than a slower discovery mechanic like archaeology.
And you're removing the RNG, right? Like if you're going through archaeology and your other option is crafting, then like you're going to get it if you craft it. Whereas archaeology, like you could not. And for me, when I was thinking about archaeology, it's the visual. Like I remember experiencing archaeology for the first time, and while you did get used to looking for suspicious dirt or suspicious sand, the problem was you very often would mine something that you didn't want to mine. And miss out on the loot entirely. I think discerning between suspicious soul sand and suspicious soul soil from regular soul sand and soul soil would be really hard in the lighting in the nether. Like I think it would be frustrating as an experience, or just like really feel like you're just squinting at the screen or hunting around for like the smallest thing. And I don't think that would be a very pleasurable experience. And I do like the fact that they are, like you said, not buried. I think of them more of like hibernating, in terms of, rather than being like a dried thing that you turn into a live thing. I feel like it's one of those aspects where like the ghast has reached a part of its life cycle, sort of like a caterpillar, going into chrysalis and then into a butterfly. I feel like the grumpy ghast has expended all of its grump and is now dehydrated and needs to go rest. And I don't know what the lore is behind the idea of them going to the fossils. I think it's just it's an easy signpost for Mojang and Soul Sand Valleys. But what I like about that is it offers some questions that Minecraft players can fill in on their own, right? Like I don't need Mojang to tell me what it is. I'm more than happy to kind of figure out like, well, why do bears go into caves to hibernate instead of just hibernating out in the open? Like why do happy ghasts or grumpy ghasts go to a Soul Sand Valley? I think there's all kinds of weird questions about animals in the real world as to why they migrate certain ways, why they come to certain areas. I know that there's questions like that about dinosaurs too, and I think that that's a cool thing to just like, well, this is just what we find, and like we don't know, and neither do you, and so you can make up your own kind of history as to why you think that happens. So I like that about them, and I think that the fossils are a really good signpost, because in a Soul Sand Valley, like they stand out like a sore thumb. Provided you can find a Soul Sand Valley, like I feel like the fossils are pretty easy to spot.
Yeah. To go back to your original point as well, the Soul Sand Valleys will spawn more ghasts too. So it's just as likely that players are going to want to go there to farm ghast tears as it is to find the dried ghast originally. So I think as a biome, it works in service of the happy ghast mechanics pretty well. So that makes sense. Also, I want to circle back to the newsread very briefly just to point out, because you laughed at this, the bug fix about happy ghasts producing footstep sounds when they fly too close to a solid block. That really made me laugh too. I like the idea of like the tentacles brushing and it just like runs along the ground for a second before it like launches back up into the air. Like so for a second the tentacles touch down. They're like, oh right, we have a job to do, and then it like launches again. I like that idea, even though it wasn't necessarily Mojang's original vision for it. But yeah, them just doing like a little Wile E. Coyote run before they take off again really made me laugh.
I was thinking about that with the ideas for the lead and the hanging the boat under the happy ghast. It kind of made me think of like, I wonder if someone at Mojang was like, well, this is a happy ghast. Do the tentacles do anything useful? Like, could we use the tentacles to grab onto things and move things to the player? And maybe that idea of a helpful happy ghast also led to like, well, mechanically it's going to be weird to try to do that with 9 tentacles hanging underneath this thing, or 6 or whatever it is. So maybe we'll attach leads to it instead. I wonder where the leads attaching to a happy ghast as we see it now, like how that idea formed. I would love to see one of those little 5-minute Minecraft behind the scenes videos on YouTube as to like the development process of like how the idea came up, how the art team came up with it, like how that came to be, fantastic and very interesting. Would be very cool to see.
Yeah, hopefully closer to the time of Happy Ghast actually getting released, we'll have a little featurette on those, because I too am very curious what the team internally thinks about Happy Ghasts, much less what the players have decided is the overall lore of them.
Last email comes in from Ulankel, a landscape artist member of our community. What makes a modern block? Hi, Pix and Joel. While listening to episode 430, I had to wonder what could be made available in an end update with the assumption that it could be blocks that would lend themselves to better modern or sci-fi blocks. I thought these blocks could be like petrified trees and function like copper and other metals that could be used decoratively. What do you think makes a block suitable for modern or sci-fi builds? With the native vibrant visual shaders announced at Minecraft Live, we can now look at whether new blocks could be made to look metallic and shiny or dull, which could be an interesting new angle to think about for vanilla builds. Uncle blew up trying to chisel an interesting pattern into an adamantium tree.
Oh,
I sense a Marvel fan.
Yeah, that's a fun one. And like in the same way that the Black Panthers sort of take on vibranium, is that it's kind of like a rare earth mineral that maybe came from space or something like that. Imagining those rare earth minerals being out there in the end is an interesting prospect for Minecraft's ecosystem as well.
For sure, I like the idea of blocks in the end being a reward for like beating the dragon and being out there. Take you from this very heavy fantasy world with bows and arrows and crossbows and like stone and trees and stuff like that in Minecraft to more modern textures. Like as society and history advances forward, you have to advance through the game in order to get the more advanced looking materials and metals and things. And I think that's a cool idea. I think modern sci-fi blocks for me, because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot because I'm switching gears with my next project. I think that they don't have to be metal. They don't have to look shiny. I think that the texture in Minecraft that lends itself best to modern or sci-fi is less specific textures. Things that are a little bit more on the smooth side, like terracotta or concrete, and non-specific textures. Like there are some things that you can maybe work in, like iron block textures, maybe some of the other metal blocks and things. But I feel like a lot of it has to be a little nondescript, and specifically stuff that has no repeating pattern. So concrete is a really good example where it's just a seamless texture. And I think that really lends itself to the creativity and the shapes that you might want to work in with a sci-fi build specifically, but even modern stuff, because most modern sci-fi visuals have curves or angles. And that's very hard to do in Minecraft, right? So in addition to that kind of non-repeating pattern, you also want to have something that's available in stairs and slabs, maybe even walls, like any kind of sub-block form that you can get it, because it allows you to do more subtle shape work without having to build at such a massive scale to get it to work with Minecraft. A really good example of this actually is Lego. Lego does all kinds of crazy cool Star Wars stuff. It's still plastic. Like they don't have metal looking shiny stuff a lot of the time. There might be a few stickers here and there. For people watching the video, there's a TIE fighter behind me on my computer, and like it's plastic. It's black plastic, gray plastic. Now what really helps, of course, is that there's a lot of angled pieces in Lego. What Minecraft does not have is triangles or large, flat plates, and that does help with Lego. But as far as the texture of Lego goes, like it's still very much plastic. But your brain just kind of thinks Star Wars spaceship and doesn't think about that too much. And I think that that's something that modern textures in Minecraft can do well, is like if they are nondescript, then it's a block that could be added for all players. Like you could just as well use it in the wall of a castle as you could the wall of a skyscraper or the wall of a Star Wars spaceship, if that's what you're modeling in Minecraft. So I think the more use for modern and sci-fi really depends on what shapes that block comes in, like what kind of stairs and slabs and other avenues. The only thing I was thinking about beyond that in terms of modern stuff would be the opposite, which would be super specific stuff. Things that redstone components that look like digital, more modern computer interfaces or things like that. And I'm struggling to think, like, I guess like locking a repeater sort of gives you that weird like little lever on it, and that sort of looks like it could be a switch. There's a couple things, like maybe a loom could be, if it was a different color, could maybe look like it was more sci-fi, or it looks like a vent. So there's a couple of things that we've got in Minecraft, but they're just not the right color. They're not neutral enough. Very much profession blocks and other specific things in Minecraft, they look like they're either made of stone or wood. And so it becomes really difficult to use those and suspend the disbelief and have them go as like a sci-fi build. So I think that really the more flexible thing to do in Minecraft would be to have more neutral looking non-specific textures available in various blocks. What do you think? Like, what would be a good modern texture for you?
To tack on to what you were saying actually about the shape language of things, I do think new materials in Minecraft can feel modern if they allow us to go beyond the basic placement of blocks. I think it feels like a modern gameplay addition, not just a modern look when you add stuff like that. And so, like, I was thinking about veneers and how those are pretty common in modern decor. You think about a cheap piece of furniture that's made of like particle board or, you know, whatever kind of like layered material, but has a veneer over the top to make it look like marble, you know, like the ability to add stuff like that. We're getting into vertical slab territory, I know, but bear with me. Like, those are common in modern decor. I was thinking about my sister's bathroom in their house was like a more modern build, and they covered the wall with this kind of like stripped wooden plank kind of thing that has like a jagged edge to it and looks very kind of modern and very nice looking. And I think that's just like a layer over a flat wall, but it's obviously not going to be like as thick as the wall is. They're not making the wall itself out of wooden planks. They're just kind of cladding it in this stuff. And I looked it up on Wikipedia because I was curious about like the etymology of veneer, if that was like the name of the inventor or something like that, if it was like Charles Veneer came up with this in the 1700s or something. They've been around since like ancient Egyptian and Roman times, according to Wikipedia. I just looked up the article for wood veneer, so you can find some more information there. But it was, you know, they stripped bark off of trees and used that to do stuff. Like there was some veneer stuff that was used in interiors and boat construction, I think, and stuff as well. So in terms of the modernity of the technique, it feels like it is part and parcel with the kind of woodworking and things that is implied the player does in Minecraft with a lot of those early game materials. So I do think that kind of modernism can still be applied using the level of technology that we have in Minecraft, provided that Mojang would be interested in applying something like a veneer, having like a surface that we could slap over the top of existing blocks. And I think that might add a modern edge to things if you were able to decorate specific faces of a block and like clad a block in another thing. Technologically speaking, that's a possibility, but again, not certain it's ever going to happen because, like I said, we're getting into the territory of like vertical slabs and that kind of thing. When I play mod packs, though, I find that just going on a texture level, any like wider wooden plank textures tend to look quite modern to me compared to the tighter packed vanilla like 4 stack of planks. I think like broader ones like that tend to look a bit more like modern floorboards, like a polished wood floor that you'd have in a home these days. I like the look of those a lot, and I find those work slightly better in a modern setting than your standard spruce wood does. But I wonder if that's more the bias of them being new and feeling modern just because there's something a little different. So I'd be curious if like those textures were implemented in a world long term, if they'd start to feel as mundane as the plank texture does to me. I think on the flip side from that, though, smaller tiled textures look more modern for stone type materials. So if you look at bricks and deep slate tiles, I think even dark prismarine for me, those feel more like modern looking blocks stylistically than stone bricks or polished granite do. Those feel a bit more kind of medieval, big chunk of quarried stone. And that harkens back to an earlier era for me than something that feels like it was made with a lot more precision. If it's like a lot of clustered tiles that are all very uniform looking, then that feels like it was made with like more accurate machinery, which kind of implies a more advanced technological process. So I think that's part of it for me. The third thing I think is animation. Like if you're able to add in something that made it feel like the material was alive in some way, or that it has like a gentle glow to it like the sea lantern does, where there's that ring that sort of pulses out from the center. I think those aren't just used in modern architecture because they are a white light that we get less of from torches and that kind of thing. They also feel a little bit sci-fi in the sense that they've got that pulsing, watery look to them in the animated texture that's very subtle, so you don't see it as much at a distance. So I think there's a few things like that that could be implemented to make things a bit more modern. I'm not sure if the end is necessarily the home for any of those on a stylistic level, but there's certainly room for textures to diversify a little bit into what feels like a more modern palette.
And I think that's something important too about a modern palette is lighting and coloring. Like a lot of modern floors are gray, but we don't have a lot of gray options for floors that look modern in Minecraft. All the wood is usually brown or variants thereof, right? And so I guess the closest we have would be now the whitewood, the pale oak. But even then, like to your point, it's a narrow texture, like it's a narrow repeating texture, and it always feels more like a log cabin to me than it does a more modern build. And the other thing about, with lighting is that things like light bulbs or halogen lights, like end rods are close, but like they're not quite what you want. And I mean, I've got a texture pack that removes the animation and removes the little purple base of a end rod. So they're very useful for me. But when you put a bunch of end rods in like your classroom build and they've got these weird sparkle magic happening on them, like it's not exactly what, the motif you're going for. And I also find that when I think about modern stuff in the world that we live in now, we have a lot of detail. Like we all have knickknacks and shelves and lamps, and a lot of our environment is much smaller than a meter squared. And so the challenge there is not always necessarily what I can do in a Minecraft build as far as the four walls, the floor and the ceiling, or the outside. For me, it's more about like, well, how can I make the inside of this look believable? Because otherwise I just have to forget about it. That's one of the reasons why we added the tables and chairs data pack to the Citadel, is because we just didn't find that anything we were doing with vanilla blocks could make it feel modern or like not a video game. Like it didn't feel like we were creating any kind of environment. We just kind of felt we were placing close enough blocks around for chairs and tables. And so that's why we went with tables and chairs. And even then, like the original tables and chairs pack, there were, I think they were obsidian and quartz as the materials for tables and chairs. And I had removed the vanilla textures and just replaced them with like black and white concrete textures in the resource pack for them. And so rather than having a wood chair that looks very medieval when it has the vanilla plank texture, a white or a black chair felt very modern. Like it felt like the kind of IKEA dining set that you would get, right? And I think that's tricky, because when you talk about just vanilla Minecraft blocks and getting something from the end or other places around, I think it's tricky to try to find neutral stuff that you can collect from the world of Minecraft that then feels like you could put it in a modern city build in your your projects in Minecraft too.
Especially with the color palette of the end branching into the alien. You think of end stone as a color, it's that kind of sickly greenish yellow color. You think of purple and how few people tend to use that, and it's because the colors are designed to feel very out there. They're chosen specifically for it to be part of an alien landscape. And it's curious to think about whether additions to the end that would encourage modern builds would end up making the end feel too comfortable for the player by their inclusion, or whether that's the kind of thing that the player would have to break that type of material out of by crafting it into something new. It's an interesting discussion, and I think it's one that we'll have to continue another time, but this is one of those evergreen topics that we get emails about quite frequently. We'd love to hear from you if you have any ideas about how the end could help Minecraft's color palette and block palette modernize slightly. That'll be it for this episode of The Spawn Chunks, though. Thank you so much for listening, folks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show was composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, please consider putting some value back in. You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any paid tier gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every week. We have monthly and quarterly hangouts where you can tell us what you've been up to in Minecraft, and we can tell you how the podcast has been performing across all of its various platforms. We currently have 288 patrons, which is up 5 from last week. We are back on the road to 300. Thank you so much for jumping on board. And special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. Just tell someone about the Spawn Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. You can find us at the Spawn Chunks on your favorite social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on your favorite podcasting platforms, and of course the video version comes out shortly thereafter. You can email the show like everyone else today at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is on the website at thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page, and that's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the program.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where these days you'll find me doing the Craft Mine update in a mini-series. I'm also playing on Misadventures SMP, and the Minecraft Survival Guide will return, because it's currently in its 3rd season. I stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and play other games from time to time. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. Stephen, ESC, and I released an episode yesterday, and that is about our take on the Minecraft movie. So Stephen and I went to go see it together here in town. We also talked about Daredevil Born Again. Not quite the season finale, but right up to it. Which is the new series on Disney+. So we talked about that. We talked a little bit about AI too. So lots of fun stuff happening over at the Citadel Cafe. I also stream on Twitch Tuesday through Saturday. A lot of Satisfactory right now. We're getting close to the highest tier where I can go from moving 780 items a minute to 1,200 items a minute. So if you want to see things move around a video game like crazy, then check out that over at twitch.tv/JoelDuggan.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, so it'll take more than 80 days to get around it.